to House Calls, episode 3. This is our third and final part of House Calls, and I am so excited to wrap it up with these amazing panelists that are going to share so much insight with you all. We have a great lineup to talk about what life looks like after college, and how do we make that money then while also saving money now? I know for me, I love to shop, so hopefully I'm going to get some points. I have my little notebook here to take some notes as well. So I'm excited to hear from our lovely panelists who have joined us. Thank you so much for being with us. We've had a really great time in House Calls, and we're so excited to wrap it up with you all. So Dr. Cruz, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit more about what your major was in undergrad, and how did you decide to kind of connect your major to your current career in the College of Education?
Sure, it's a really great question, and I know that so many of our students are thinking about this in an existential way every day of their life, right? So first thing I want to say is that the National Center for Education Statistics tells us that 80% of college students will change their major at least once during their college career. Okay, so if you're thinking about doing that and you've done that, I certainly did it. You're not weird. And on average, most college students change it at least 3 times during their college career. I was no different. I went from being, let's see, a dance major to a foreign language major to a pre-law major to, I think I settled on psychology, and in all of those majors, I always tried to envision myself in that field in the future, and it wasn't happening. And then that's when I started to do some reflection and started to think, well, what do all these things have in common? What is it that I love about these things, all of these disparate fields? And I realized that it was culture. It was like in the dance classes, it was the ethnic dance that I loved. In the foreign language, it was always about the culture, and language. And so when I put that all together, and by the way, I was working as a tutor in the tutoring center, and I realized that I love teaching. So I put together that culture, that fascination with culture and history and society and people and teaching, and I came to my major of social studies education. And then from there, I switched. I was able to at first I was scared that I would have like so much more classes to take or whatever, but get yourself a really good college advisor, who can help you navigate those waters. And I was able to do it in time. In fact, I graduated a little bit early, got my degree in social studies ed, got my master's in that, got my doctorate in that. And I can honestly tell you that I love it as much today as I did many, many years ago when I started. So that's what my fervent hope is for each of our students tuning in tonight, that they think about their passion, what really motivates them, what really gets them out of bed in the morning, and figure out a way to envision themselves in that field and then getting there through their college education. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about that process later.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Cruz. I think on this call, definitely reach out to your faculty, because they will honestly leave these impressions on you that you will carry with you for all the years in your life. You're going to remember something that your faculty member says to you. You're going to remember everything that they do for you, because they are here to help you. So definitely reach out for sure. Well, moving on, of course, it's still talking about career planning, but I think peer-to-peer advice and guidance and conversation is so important. So Syed, I would love to hear from you about what are some of your career goals, and what are some of the things that you've done to ensure you achieve these goals? I know you've talked about some of this through your work with CLCE and getting involved on campus, but I would love to hear more, and I'm sure our participants on the call would love to hear more as well.
Of course. So I want to go to medical school in the future, and I'm like super interested in psychiatry. I'm really passionate about mental health in general. So something I always try to do when I think of like my medical school application is I want to build a team. I think having a team is just really important, because it's kind of like your slogan in a way. It kind of gives an idea like what kind of applicant you are. So I really try to like make sure a lot of my activities are focused on mental health. So the way I do that, one of the ways I'm also a crisis counselor. I just volunteer 4 hours a week. And that has been also super rewarding because, it's one thing to say that you're passionate about something, but when you're actually putting that into action, that's way like better just like even for an application purpose. So I really try to make sure I'm doing things that are aligning with like my mental health team. And also, I volunteered at Moffitt Cancer Center and also hospice, just because I really want to. It's something that when you're pre-med, you just know you have to volunteer. But for me, the way I think of it is that it's just giving me more insight into what is it like to be a physician. I also reach out to a lot of physicians via email. I know it can be really hard to shadow. I think that's like the hardest part of just being a pre-med. But something I try to do is I try to stay persistent and I just email as many physicians as possible, hoping that at least one or two will respond. And usually, like, if you email a bunch, at least one will respond. And sometimes that's all you need. You just need one person to respond. So, I try to stay persistent with that. But with COVID, it has become harder to shadow and also volunteer. But, I'm still trying to make sure I'm volunteering as a crisis counselor. Something I've also done is I'm also doing undergraduate research with faculty from the College of Public Health, and I specifically chose to do research with that faculty member because I'm really interested in her project. I think that is also super important because I feel like research is like this big thing, and honestly, a lot of people think that you have to do like basic clinical research for medical school, but I think it's also important to be able to talk about the research that you're doing. And so for that, I specifically wanted to do research in public health. So these are like some ways through which I've been preparing myself for my career. But also I remember that the most important thing is obviously academics. And I think that is also super important because I feel like these co-curricular things you can, like, let's say if I take a gap year, I can still do those things there. Whereas the academics, I feel like if that falls, it's really hard to build that on. And it's also expensive because, like, let's say if you have to take a post-bac or something, that can be really expensive. So I always try to make sure that I'm prioritizing my academics, and I like religiously use my Outlook calendar. I feel like I wouldn't like survive without a calendar, especially because I have two jobs. So it's really important for me to like plan my days ahead. And I recommend that to everyone, regardless of like what your career goal is, because I feel like academics should always be your top priority because that is like the hardest thing to fix. Whereas like volunteer hours or research, you can still do that even if you're taking like a gap year. Like a lot of people I know take gap years to do like research, but I feel like academics is like something, especially with the chemistry, organic chemistry. Like organic chemistry itself takes up so much of my time. So I always try to make sure I'm prioritizing academics, and yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. You shared some really great points that I think are very helpful for our peers. And a lot of what you were talking about was volunteering, networking, right? We've thrown around this word of networking, and it is so big. And you actually made me just reminisce on my time in undergrad because I started in a volunteer opportunity, just doing some community service at a local nonprofit, which led to me meeting the marketing director, which led to an internship, which led to following her to do another internship at a government agency. And so it really does trickle down. So definitely network, because you would be surprised the opportunities that you get in the community and beyond that. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's very great. And I'm so glad that you're doing research, and you had so much great insight that I know participants on this call are going to take away from. Perfect. Well, we've talked a lot about career planning, but there's also another side to this, and this is financial planning, right? And so I would love to invite Candace into this conversation to really talk more about, what are some strategies that you personally implemented to prepare for your life, grad school or career life while you were a student, and who really supported you on that journey? Anyone, please feel free to answer it as well. I'm sure we all think of someone instantly when we hear that.
Well, I, as an undergraduate student and still the case, I was a first generation student. So there wasn't a financial plan. The understanding that I had growing up was you're going to graduate from high school and you're going to go to college, because I was always a good student. And go to college. And Georgia, I'm from Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia. So we have the Hope Scholarship. So because I was a good student, that was one of the aid that was available to me. And then also I was a music major. So, and then one day, and that's another story, one day I ran into my mentor, and then I went into the higher education. So identifying with you, Brandy, and that change of direction. So there wasn't a financial plan for me as far as funding my education. I was a good student. I was talented. I am talented with my music, and I received those 2 scholarships. I also was debt averse. I did not want to take out student loan debt. I heard a lot of messages saying, Candace, this is a bad thing. You shouldn't do it. And because of that, I kept my teenage job as a cashier at the local grocery store, and I took on work study at the same time. So I was working 40 hours, carrying 18 credit hours while a freshman in school. So you know what happens. We all know what tends to happen when you're trying to be an employee and a student and carry those expectations at the same time and be a scholarship recipient and manage those demands. Towards the end of my freshman year, I became very stressed, and I also was about to lose hope, which was also known as Hope Scholarship, because my GPA dropped. And that was the question my mother always asked me. She said, "Do you have hope?" And I said, "Well, it's about to go." But luckily, I had an amazing professor who helped me get back on the right path and keep that scholarship. But I also had to reprioritize and look at my education and consider that I am a student first. For these 4 years, that is my priority. Being an employee at the local grocery store was not a priority. Being a student first was the best priority for me to be successful, because if I drop my GPA lowered, I was going to lose out on about $6,000. So, and that's for the aid year, and to cover my tuition fees and get a refund check. So I had to reprioritize my goals and think about it differently. So that's typically the information or the message I want to give students, is that you're a student first, and you also have to view your education as an investment. So I understand the concern about student loans, but you want to borrow wisely. Usually I will encourage students to, when I did start borrowing loans as a student, that was towards my senior year and then off to my graduate year. And one thing that I know that I made a mistake and I will do differently, and I'll have students look at it. I use my loans to buy food. I did. So it was the Chick-fil-A's and the different snacks, but I used those loans. I did not know that food stamps was available to me as a student who was living off campus, and I maintained at least 20 hours of work. I was able to qualify for food stamps. So really taking advantage of all those resources that are available to you. That is the biggest thing that was mentioned today. Is, there are so many people that are in the right place at the right time to assist you and navigate. But just keep in mind that those resources are available to you to help you overcome a lot of the challenges that you ran into. So that was pretty much my financial concept. I didn't have a lot of understanding of finances coming through undergrad and into grad school. I wish I had multiple financial education services that are reaching out to me to have this type of conversation, and I have peer financial educators who can relate to me. I wish I had those type of services that we have here at USF. And those are the things, my experiences, my personal experience is what motivates me to continue to work with students and help them understand their money.
Candace, I think you brought up so many great pieces, and I'm sure as you're looking at the chat, everyone is agreeing
Yes.
with you and having similar experiences. Much like you, I was a first generation college student. So, right, like you don't really know what you're doing, and you know, you have your scholarships and you're trying not to spend money on things that you shouldn't spend money on. And much like you, I wanted to come out of undergrad debt free. And so, you know, very thankful for the opportunities of getting involved, of being in a sorority and having scholarship opportunities to gain more scholarships. But much like you, I would have loved to have a bull to bull office and peers to walk me through that. Because sometimes, right, it does feel a little lonely. Finances can be a stressor, especially as you're going through college. And another great point you brought up, and I tell all of my students this, is even if you're a student leader, student always comes first.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I love hearing you say that, because it is something that we always say to students is you are here to be a student, leader comes second.
Mm-hmm.
So just really reminding our students of that, because sometimes, you know, that can be a little, you get focused on other things and you're like, okay, wait, why am I here? Got to remember my purpose, got to remember what my why is. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. I definitely think so many students were able to relate with you in the chat and are looking forward to connecting with you. So, of course, still talking about financial planning. Candace, you know, you talked about why it's important for students to manage their finances while in college and touched on that a little bit. But how can financial management assist students in achieving their career goals? You know, how can they get started now? What can they do? What are some things that Bowl to Bowl can offer our students to really support them as they move into this next step in their journey?
Yes, I'm going to place the link to our website. We are offering virtual coaching sessions. So those are available to you all. We have coaching sessions in basic money management, credit building, investing. We're not telling you what to invest in, because we are not advisors, but we are educators. So we want you to know about the basic concept of investing. One thing I love about the investment coaching session is that it's about delayed gratification. We have to practice that delayed gratification. We don't, especially in as we are pursuing liberal arts education, we don't always receive our rewards immediately. It takes time. And that's the thing about investing. So I really encourage you all to get involved in one of our coaching sessions to work on those skill sets. Our peer financial educators are available to, again, meet with you one-on-one in a virtual setting. We also have workshops. The other piece that you could work on now, if you have a general concept of credit, you want to learn a little bit more, now is a great time to establish your credit history. If you practice responsibility and discipline, those two things, responsibility and discipline, you are ready to practice establishing your credit score. And that could be something that you can come out of college with, is with a positive credit history and score, so that you can make some smart decisions. It's also one of those things that businesses, and I know Doug can chime in on, that they look at your credit history. Certain fields will look in your credit history, or even for some cases, like in my area, they looked at our student loan debt history. So they wanted to know, did you have a delinquency or default under your account at any time? Because you're going to be here to assist students. So that information is information that employers want to know. So now is a great time to start building that. But I caution that you have to practice responsibility and discipline. And we have a coaching session where we can give you some tips on smart ways to do that. For example, the secured credit card, or you could be an authorized user if you're able to join on your parents' credit card account.
Yeah, you brought up some really great points. One thing I loved was building credit. I think that was one thing I didn't really think about as a student. And I just bought a car like a few weeks ago. And let me tell you, it's a process and it's confusing and it can be stressful. And so I definitely should have called Candace and been like, hey, Candace, can you come sit with me? because it was a lot. And it's a lot of terminology that we don't necessarily think of as we are in undergrad, or how our student loans can affect us afterwards. I think it's so easy to just click the accept button because we see that money there and it's great money. And we're like, yeah, we're going to save it. And then we take a spring break trip, or we take a summer trip, or, we invest in fun things because, right, they tell you to invest in those in your 20s. But we also recognize that sometimes later on, those choices can affect you. And so I definitely think it would be great for students to reach out to your office and really do those workshops. That way, when you go to buy your first car, you're like, listen, Candace told me what to do. I'm walking in here. I'm confident. I'm signing that paper, and I am negotiating my price of my car. So thank you.
Brandy, I love that you mentioned terminology, because there are key terminology in the field of finances that you need to know. It's not separate from you. It's your own personal experience. And that's really important. Sometimes we associate money, especially student loan debt, as something that your future self has to deal with, but it's something that you're actually experiencing. If you've taken out a student loan, if you have a scholarship, you've already signed some type of financial agreement, as far as funding your education or paying, or just even being enrolled in school. You are tied to that tuition and fees, and it's your responsibility to pay for it. So it could feel overwhelming, and that's what I want to do, and that's what I'm passionate about in our space with Multiple Education, is to help students personalize it and not feel as overwhelmed by it, but take more ownership of that experience. Also, you want to consider having a financial mentor as well. That is something. I've had a classmate when I was an undergrad who made really smart financial decisions. So I would just ask her, like, how did you do this? And what were you thinking? And there were some things that her parents communicated to her, which she shared with me. And then I also had financial mentors where I watched what they did, the type of decisions they made, and I would mimic those decisions and ask other questions. So it's really important to find that network, that group to connect with, who are financially minded.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Cruz, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yes, and I wanted to ask Candace a couple of things. I appreciate you very much saying that you're first generation college student. I think many of us here today are, I certainly am from that background. And one of the things that I have found is that, especially because we're first generation college students, we need that financial literacy as well, perhaps even more so. Because if we come from a family with more modest means, you didn't necessarily have people who knew about this stuff, right? So you're nodding. So you're saying yes. Have you found that in your work to be the case as well?
I found that in my work, because that is part of my, I'm in the doctoral program in higher education, so that is part of my research area. But also personally, that is something that I struggled in communication with my mother, she attended college, but she did not finish college. So she has a different concept of what it cost. Back in like 1976, it was a different cost associated with it. And then also the student loan amount was different for her as well. She still has no idea what my student loan debt is or was at one time. So there was always like sort of a disconnect as far as funding or even the expectation of higher education or my college experience. So yes, and then also the expectation of assistance, and this is not necessarily specific to first generation, but also to low income students. If you are first generation and low income, then there's that extra layer of expectation. There was an expectation that when I received that $3,000 refund check, that I would help my family a little bit. That I would, there was something, there was, and it was sort of understood, not too much pressure. And I think I internalized that pressure as well. That's why I held on to 2 jobs, because I was like, my family may need me, or I need to take care of myself. that pressure to just say, okay, I don't want to call on my mother, but I need to be able to take care of myself. That was unnecessary pressure that I put on myself. And sometimes I've connected with students and have had this conversation, because sometimes we put on that pressure when that isn't the expectation that your parents have for you. They're more so focused on having you, be successful in your education career.
Yeah, basic needs are real, absolutely. And I had another question for you, because you talked about discipline and responsibility. And one of the things that I have found is, with some of my students, with people in general, but I've talked to some of my students, is that I think we've gotten into a point in our, as consumers, in our consumer culture, that we're not mindful of where all of our pennies go to.
Mhm.
And if you've ever like tried to lose weight, for example, like one of the most super helpful things is to write down every single thing that you put in your mouth. All of a sudden you become super mindful, super conscious of what you're doing. So do you have any exercises like that for consumer spending that could help students, kind of focus on that?
Oftentimes students will come to us and ask about any software, like money apps that students have. And if you go to our website, you'll see a icon for money apps, which includes money apps that students can use to budget, but also like a coupon book as well, like a USF coupon book you have students have access to now. But yes, we encourage students to utilize those tools. But the one that's the most effective, because I've used several tools like Mint and How to Budget, or You Need to Budget. I've used those tools, but I've always gone back to the basics: Excel or paper and pencil, or my note page of my phone. I've always gone back to the basics of just writing it down. So like you were saying, Dr. Cruz, I think that is just the discipline of that, it holds accountability. When you have to write it down, it's sort of like, oh, it's sort of a painful reality, because you're like, I am overspending. But that also ties into weight loss too. And those are one of the things to write it down. Sometimes those tools like Mint is helpful because it does track it for you automatically, but also it takes away sort of the responsibility to track it and look at it. So it runs on its own. But when you have to write it down and put it in an Excel sheet, then there is a reality check that happens in that sense. So we have those tools. We provide them to students, but we also, it's funny, I talk to my peers who are very money minded, and I was like, which one do you use? And they're like, well, I use Excel. I said, well, you guys are telling them about the money apps. They're like, well, they want to know. But I'm like, well, what do you actually use? Yeah, I use Excel. I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, be sure to mention that to them as well. Now, I do have a budget sheet, and I can get that to you all. It's another tool that is on PDF, and I'll share that with you all so that you can have that tool as well.
Thank you so much. Those were some really great questions. Thank you for bringing those to the table, Dr. Cruz. And of course, I'm very much a paper and pen person. I know they say to use technology to take notes and stuff, but I still go through about a notebook a month. It's just something that sticks with me. Also, a lot of our banks have moved to, if you do online banking through an app, I know USA just moved to doing a pie chart, and I'm like, oh, I got to stop buying clothes and shoes because I'm getting out of hand. And so sometimes it's nice to see that, because I think it's so easy to just swipe your debit card, put the chip in, and just keep moving. And you just don't necessarily realize all the things that you're spending on, right? We don't realize when we run through because we need an ice cream after a long day, how that adds up, right? Or that Starbucks, right? I'm not going to lie, it's pumpkin season, so I'm all about it. But you don't think about those things as you're swiping your card. And so being able to see that is very helpful too. So thank you all for sharing that.
One final thing about Starbucks, I we have a budget tool that students can use, and I had the students in my one of the freshman foundation course mention that they would go to Starbucks every day and get that frappuccino or whatever special drink. So what they found is that they were spending $180 a month, which total $810. And I was like, okay, so, and if you're using loans, I'm like, you're using your loans to pay for that Starbucks, and you're going to be paying for that Starbucks for a long time. So that's why one of the things that I've been pushing for students. Now, if you need loans to feed yourself, that's one thing because you are hungry, but also keep in mind that we do have our food pantry here. We do have like food stamps that are available to a lot of college students. If I knew about that as an undergrad, I would have taken advantage of that a long time ago. But those are resources that are available to you, so you can cut back on those student loans.
Thank you for sharing that. It definitely adds up for sure. So those were all of the questions that I had for our panelists. Of course, I want to give our panelists one more opportunity if there are any other support services that your respective offices do to provide support for first-year students or any students who are looking to plan their career or financially plan their life in their academic and personal goals. I wanted to give you all the opportunity to share any last minute thoughts, as well as welcome questions from our participants if we have any questions. Candace.
Well, I have to mention the $500 drawing that we have. So the Reduce Your Debt Challenge, aka Team Zero, you can join the program. It's a learning module found in Canvas, but you'll navigate through the module, and each module that you complete place you in a drawing for entry to receive $500 in loan forgiveness, or if you haven't borrowed loans this semester, then we'll give you that $500 as a scholarship. Okay, so we're just trying to motivate students. So we select 3 students. It's funny because a lot of students will enroll in the program, but they definitely have to complete the program or earn modules or complete the modules to even compete for it. So you participate in it. You have a good chance of earning or winning $500 in loan forgiveness or $500 as a scholarship.
Such a great resource.